So in today's video, I'm going to be diving into the truth about caregiving burnout and is there any relief? So this is not going to be a how-to video, this is going to be a I see you video, because if you have been caretaking, you know how this feels, and I'm going to share a little bit of what helped me get through the process and validate some of what you're going through. But if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris, I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So one of the biggest challenges in caregiving is not having any time to take care of yourself. You know, that striving for a balance is great in most situations, but in caregiving, there is no such thing as a really healthy balance. It's really about finding small pockets of time to yourself, because caregiving is overwhelming and it's super emotionally draining. If you've ever been a caregiver, say me too in the comments. I'm really hoping this video is going to help. Now, if you're like me and you struggle with codependency, it's a double whammy, because as codependents, we caregive a lot. But when there's an actual real caregiving situation required of us, it can bring up a ton of resentment and feelings because we have been taking care of people our whole life. And honestly, it was my codependency recovery that got me through it. Now, the other challenge that leads to caregiving burnout is that it's really easy to lose who you are in the process of caregiving, because all of your time and energy is spent on giving to that other person. And what happens is we end up resenting it in some way because it causes so much overwhelm. So I really want to normalize that if you feel any dread or anger or resentment at the situation, or even at the person you're caregiving, you're not alone. This is very common, but it's not talked about because we feel ashamed that we're actually upset at our loved one for being sick or for having an accident. And of course, it's not their fault. So I'm going to share a little bit about my own story. A couple of years ago, I had my ex-husband living with us for about a year after he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. There was no way he could live by himself, and I did not want him to suffer, and I wanted to make sure that I was taking care of him. And luckily, my husband and my son were on board with that. 2 months later, my mom fell. She was 93, and she ended up in rehab for 7 weeks. And because my sister and I didn't trust the facility because they were understaffed, we took shifts. And every day for almost 7 weeks, I went for 8 hours a day, and it was an hour drive each way. And then I would come home and take care of Bob. It was beyond exhausting, but I learned a lot, and that's what I want to share with you is how I got through that process. Because feeling angry, resentment, total overwhelm, maybe you feel like you could cry at a drop of a hat. I felt all of that because caregiving tests us to the ultimate limit. Our emotional energy, our mental energy, because we're keeping track of doctor's appointments and really important meds, and maybe even having to advocate for our loved one because maybe the doctors aren't doing their job or the facility isn't caring for them like we want them to. All of those are factors, because when you're caregiving and you're an advocate for your loved one, it's a lot to take on, and I just really want to acknowledge you for that. If you've ever struggled with caregiver burnout, say me too in the comments. I'm right there with you. But I did get through it, and I want to give you that hope that you can too. So another challenge with caregiving is it can create a lot of family conflict. If this is an elderly parent, you're not always going to agree on who does what. And often in families, one sibling tends to do a lot more than the others. And maybe one sibling doesn't really contribute much at all. Maybe they're in another state. Maybe they don't have the skills. Maybe they're just opting out. There's lots of reasons for this, but it's really common when there's caregiving of an elderly parent. So I really want to also validate that this is really tricky. There's no easy, quick solution here. But part of what I learned in this process, because there were some disagreements, is to speak up when I needed to, even when it doesn't change anything. Because part of this process is learning how to take care of yourself in an entirely different way. And if something isn't okay with you and you have other family members that you need to negotiate with, it's really important to stay emotionally current and to say things like, you know, that doesn't work for me, or I really need to talk a little bit more about this, or let's come up with some other options. Because advocating for yourself is going to be really key in the caregiving process, because you're going to have really limited time. And sometimes what we really need to do is ask for what we need. And whether or not you get it is another matter, but just the act of asking is a way for you to take care of yourself. Now let's talk a little bit about what could help. The first thing you could do is see if somebody in your life would be willing to research caregiving support groups, where you can meet with other people who are doing intense caregiving. Can be a lifesaver, because I needed to be heard. Now, I didn't need that because I had a really big scope of friends and I was able to get my support through them. But if you don't have people who understand the caregiving process and you feel isolated, having a group support is really key. But you're probably not going to have the emotional or mental energy to research that yourself. So that's something you could ask somebody else to do for you. Because caregiving is really isolating, and it's really important for you to feel seen and heard during this process. The next thing you could do is share your pain and your struggles with your friends. I know you might say, oh, I don't want to burden them, but you know what? If they're true friends, they're going to be there for you. Often when it comes to situations like this, it actually shows you who is going to show up for you and who isn't. And for me, I was very blessed that I had a lot of people to call, because I've cultivated a lot of friendship over the years. And some people could hang in there longer with me than others, but that was okay, because I needed my little community of people to talk things out and to share my frustration and to just whine sometimes and complain that this is really hard. Because the act of venting how you feel and that frustration to trusted people in your life is going to help you alleviate that stress, because it gets it out of your body. The other thing I want you to consider doing, which I did, is ask for help. Ask for little things, because a lot of times we feel like we're burdening our family and friends, especially if this is a long-term situation. But you could ask them to go to the grocery store for you, do an errand, take your loved one to an appointment so you can get an hour off. Because what you want to do is you want to carve out any time you can for yourself, even if it's an hour or two here and there. And if your friends and family can help you with that, like for instance, maybe you have a sibling that isn't willing to do much, but they could come every Sunday afternoon and give you a break. So another thing you might notice that's super disappointing is that a lot of people don't necessarily offer to help with the caregiving, even if they're family members, even if they're close friends. Caregiving is a huge task, and most people are not going to volunteer for that. And for me, that was sort of disheartening, because I thought I would have a lot more help than I did, especially with my ex-husband. But you know what? I'm the one who wanted to do the caregiving, and I could live with that. But I also had to accept that a lot of people didn't help in the way that I thought they would. And they had their own lives, and a lot of people just don't sign up for caregiving unless they absolutely have to. Because let's face it, it's a draining process, and people shy away from that level of care. And that's just part of life, is accepting that. You may have to work through feelings of sadness and anger and resentment towards those people, because for whatever reason they weren't able to help. And you just need to be able to live with yourself with what you're contributing. Because what you need to do is you need to shift the focus off of what other people aren't doing and back onto why you're doing what you're doing. I know for many people, it's not a choice. And that's where the anger and resentment gets really difficult, because you feel like this has been thrust upon you and it isn't something you ever signed up for. And that's why getting your support and asking for help, even if it's for little things, is really important for your self-care. The last thing I'll say is try to find little ways to take care of yourself. For me, my daily walks went out the window, but I could do it 2 or 3 times a week if I was lucky. Because if I had a window of time, I took it. Don't feel guilty, because part of this process of caregiving burnout is feeling like you're always overwhelmed. So taking those breaks, doing exactly what you want to do, having that comfort meal, whatever you need to get through it is really important. Because that's also what helped me, is realize that, you know what, I have to find those small pockets of time that I can have for myself. And sometimes that meant setting boundaries with my loved one. I remember one thing that used to happen is I would walk past his bedroom, and in the morning he would just really want to unload because he had a hard night mentally. And at some level, I couldn't do it anymore. So I had to say, you know what, can I have my coffee first and then we'll talk? And it was little things like that that helped me survive it. Because if you feel like you can never say no to your loved one or never put your needs in the mix, it's going to be really, really tough for you to survive the caregiving process. And I don't want that for you. I am right there with you if you're caregiving. I know how painful it is. I know how exhausting it is, but you will get through this. And if you have a support system or a recovery program that you work, rely on that system of support to get you through. Now, the next thing I want you to do is I want you to go watch my video on 12-step programs, because that might be a really good form of support for you. Thanks so much.